Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 334. Rājovāda Jataka. The Bull Through Floods, etc. This story was told by the master when at Jetavana monastery concerning the advice to a king. The introductory story will be found in full in the Tesakuna birth. But in this version of it the master said, "Kings of old, sire, listening to the words of the wise, ruled justly and attained to the heavenly world." And at the request of the king he told a story of the olden times. Once upon a time when Brahāchatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born in a Brahmin family. And when he came of age, he was trained in all the arts. And adopting the ascetic life he developed all the faculties and attainments, and took up his dwelling in a pleasant quarter of the Himalayas, living on wild fruits and roots. At this time the king, being anxious to find out his defects, went about inquiring if there was anyone who would tell him his faults. And not finding anyone to speak to his criticism, either within doors or without, either within the city or outside it, he wandered about the countryside in disguise, thinking, "How will it be in the country?" And not meeting with anyone there to speak to his criticism, and hearing men speak only of his merits, he thought, "How will it be in the Himalaya region?" And he went into the forest and wandered about till he reached the hermitage of the Bodhisattva, where after saluting him, and addressing him in a friendly manner he took a seat on one side. At that moment the Bodhisattva was eating some ripe figs which he had brought from the wood. They were delicious and sweet, like powdered sugar. He addressed the king and said, "Your Excellency, I request, eat this ripe fig and drink some water." The king did so, and asked the Bodhisattva, "Why, reverend sir, is this ripe fig so exceedingly sweet?" "Your Excellency," he replied, "the king now exercises his rule with justice and equity. That is why it is so sweet. In the reign of an unjust king, does it lose its sweetness, sir?" "Yes, Your Excellency. In the time of unjust kings, oil, honey, molasses and the like, as well as wild roots and fruits, lose their sweetness and flavor, and not these only but the whole realm becomes bad and flavorless. But when the rulers are just, these things become sweet and full of flavor, and the whole realm recovers its tone and flavor." The king said, "It must be so, reverend sir," and without letting him know that he was the king, he saluted the Bodhisattva and returned to Benares. And thinking to prove the words of the ascetic, he ruled unjustly, saying to himself, "Now I shall know all about it," and after the lapse of a short time he went back and saluting the Bodhisattva, sat respectfully on one side. The Bodhisattva, using exactly the same words, offered him a ripe fig, which proved to be bitter to his taste. Finding it to be bitter he spat it out, saying, "It is bitter, sir." Said the Bodhisattva, "Your Excellency, the king must be unjust, for when rulers are unjust, everything beginning with the wild fruits in the wood, lose all their sweetness and flavor." And on this he recited these stanzas. "The bull through floods a devious course will take, the herd of cows all trailing in his wake. So if a leader tortuous paths pursue, to lowly ends will he guide the vulgar crew, and the whole realm and age that way regret. But if the bull a course direct should steer, the herd of cows straight follow in his rear. So should their chief to righteous ways be true, the common folk injustice will avoid, and through the realm shall holy peace follow." The king, after hearing the Bodhisattva's exposition of the truth, let him know he was the king and said, "Holy sir, formerly it was due to me alone that the figs were first sweet and then bitter, but now I will make them sweet again." Then he saluted the Bodhisattva and returned home, and ruling righteously restored everything to its original condition. The master, having ended his lesson, identified the birth. At that time Ananda was the king, and I myself was the ascetic. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 335. Jambuka Jataka. Jackal beware, etc. This story was told by the master while living in the bamboo grove, about the attempt of Devadatta to imitate the Buddha. The incident that gave rise to the story has been told in full before. Here is a short summary of it. When the master asked Sariputra what Devadatta did when he saw him, the elder monk replied, "Sir, in taking you off he put a fan in my hand and lay down, and then Kokalika struck him on the breast with his knee. And so in taking you off he got into trouble." The master said, "This happened to Devadatta before," and being pressed by the elder monk, he told an old world legend. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born as a young lion, and lived in a cave of the Himalayas, and one day after killing a buffalo and eating of its flesh he took a drink of water and returned home. A jackal saw him, and being unable to escape lay down on his belly. The lion said, "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Jackal?" "Sir," he said, "I would be your servant." The lion said, "Well, come on then," and conducting him to the place where he lived, he day by day brought him meat and fed him. When the jackal had grown fat on the lion's broken meat, one day a feeling of pride sprang up in him, and he came near to the lion, and said, "My lord, I am ever a hindrance to you. You constantly bring me meat and feed me. Today do you remain here. I will go and kill an elephant, and after eating my fill will bring some meat to you." Said the lion, "Friend Jackal, let not this seem good in your eyes. You have not come from a stock that feeds on the flesh of the elephants that it kills. I will kill an elephant and bring its flesh to you. The elephant surely is big of body. Do not undertake what is contrary to your nature, but listen to my words." And on this he spoke the first stanza. "Jackal, beware. His tusks are long. One of your puny race would scarcely dare so huge and strong a beast as this to face." The jackal, though forbidden by the lion, issued on from the cave and thrice uttered the cry of a jackal. And looking to the base of the mountain, he saw a black elephant moving below, and thinking to fall on his head he sprang up and turning over in the air fell at the elephant's feet. The elephant lifting up his forefoot planted it on the jackal's head and smashed his skull to pieces. The jackal lay there groaning, and the elephant went off trumpeting. The Bodhisattva came and standing on the top of the precipice saw how the jackal had met his death, and said, "Through his pride was this jackal killed," and uttered 3 stanzas. A jackal once assumed the lion's pride, and elephant as equal rival defied. Prone on the earth, while groans his bosom ripped, he learned the rash encounter to repent. Who thus should challenge one of exceptional fame, nor notice the vigour of his well-knit frame, shares the sad fate that on the jackal came. But who the measure of his own power knows, and nice discretion in his language shows, true to his duty lives and triumphs over his rivals. Thus did the Bodhisattva in these stanzas teach the duties proper to be done in this world. The master, having ended his lesson, identified the birth. At that time Devadatta was the jackal, and I myself was the lion. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 336. Brahāchatta Jataka. Grass is still, etc. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, of a certain rogue. The incident that suggested the story has been already told. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva became his minister and worldly and spiritual advisor. The king of Benares went against the king of Kosala with a large army, and coming to Shravasti city, after a battle entered the city and took the king prisoner. Now the king of Kosala had a son, Prince Chatta by name. He made his escape in disguise, and went to Taxila, where he acquired the 3 Vedas and the 18 liberal arts. Then he left Taxila, and while still studying the practical uses of science, he arrived at a certain border village. In a wood near this 500 ascetics lived in huts of leaves. The prince approached them, and with the idea of learning somewhat of them, he became an ascetic, and so acquired whatsoever knowledge they had to impart. In due course of time he became the leader of that band of disciples. One day he addressed his company of holy men and asked them, saying, "Sirs, why do you not go to the central region?" "Sir," they said, "in the central region are said to be living wise men. They pose one with questions, call upon one to return thanks and to repeat a form of blessing, and rebuke the incompetent. And therefore we are afraid to go there." "Fear not," he said, "I will manage all this for you." "Then we will go," they said. And all of them taking their various necessities in due course reached Benares. Now the king of Benares, having got all the kingdom of Kosala into his possession, set up loyal officials as governors, and himself, having collected all their available treasure, returned with his spoil to Benares. And filling iron pots with it, he buried them in the royal garden, and then continued to live there. So these holy men spent the night in the king's garden, and on the next day went into the city to beg alms, and came to the door of the palace. The king was so charmed with their manner that he called them up and made them sit on the dais and gave them rice and cakes, until it was their mealtime asked them such and such questions. Chatta won the king's heart by answering all his questions, and at the close of the meal he offered up various forms of thanksgiving. The king was still more pleased, and taking a promise from them he made them all stay in his garden. Now Chatta knew a spell for bringing to light buried treasure, and while living there he thought, "Where can this fellow have put the money which belonged to my father?" So repeating the spell and looking about him he discovered that it was buried in the garden. And thinking that with this money he would recover his kingdom also, he addressed the ascetics and said, "Sirs, I am the son of the king of Kosala. When our kingdom was seized by the king of Benares, I escaped in disguise, and so far I have saved my life. But now I have got the property which belonged to my family. With this will I go and recover my kingdom. What will you do?" "We too will go with you," they replied. "Agreed," he said, and had some big leather sacks made, and at night digging a hole in the ground he pulled out the treasure pots, and putting the money into the sacks he had the pots filled with grass. Then he ordered the 500 holy men and others as well to take the money, and fled to Shravasti city. There he had all the king's officers seized. And recovering his kingdom he restored the walls, watchtowers and other works, and having thus made the city impregnable against the attack of any hostile king, he took up his dwelling there. It was told to the king of Benares, "The ascetics have carried off the treasure from your garden and are fled." He went to the garden and opening the pots found only grass in them. And by reason of his lost treasure great sorrow fell upon him. Going to the city he wandered about murmuring, "Grass, grass," and no one could soothe his grief. Thought the Bodhisattva, "The king is in great trouble. He wanders to and fro, idly chattering. Except myself, no one has the power to drive away his sorrow. I will free him from his trouble." So one day while seated quietly with him, when the king began to chatter, he repeated the first stanza. "Grass is still your constant cry. Who did take your grass away? What your need of it, or why do you this word only say?" The king, on hearing what he said, replied in a second stanza. "Chatter, holy man of fame, as it happened this way came. Him alone to blame I hold, substituting grass for gold. The Bodhisattva, on hearing this, uttered a third stanza. Canny folk their rule should make, little give and mickle take. What he took was all his own, what he left was grass alone. On hearing this the king uttered the fourth stanza. Virtue follows no such rules, these are morals fit for fools. Doubtful morals they must be, learning too is vanity. While he thus blamed chatter, the king by these words of the Bodhisattva was freed from his sorrow and ruled his kingdom righteously. The master here ended his lesson and identified the birth. At that time the dishonest brother was the great chatter, and I myself was the wise minister.